You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. Today, we're discussing a crucial chapter in the ongoing legal battle surrounding R. Kelly. A chapter that unfolded during the Chicago appeal process. Now, this appeal was not just another procedural step. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance for the judicial system to demonstrate fairness, impartiality, and adherence to the law as it is written, not as it is bent, twisted, or interpreted to suit particular interests. But what transpired instead paints a troubling picture, one that raises serious questions about bias, judicial conduct, and the integrity of the appeal system itself. During the Chicago appeal process, R. Kelly's defense attorney Jennifer Bonjean made a bold and critical observation before the panel of appeal judges. She openly declared that she was well aware the judges were already biased, leaning heavily toward the government's side of the case. This was not a casual remark. This was not a throwaway line in a heated courtroom exchange. It was a deliberate statement made in the presence of those very judges, highlighting the imbalance that was already palpable in the process. Now, unsurprisingly, one of the judges was quick to dismiss this claim. She brushed it aside as if the very suggestion of bias was offensive or worse, irrelevant. But dismissing the statement does not erase its truth. And when the deliberations finally concluded, what happened? Exactly what many expected from the outset. The panel of judges sided against R. Kelly, denying him the relief he so desperately deserved. The outcome seemed less like the product of objective legal analysis, and more like the inevitable result of a system already predisposed against him.
But, and obviously we would acknowledge that some of these circuits have already sided with the government's position on this. The issue is in front of the Second Circuit presently, so.
I don't think any circuit has sided with your position.
You're right, yeah, that's correct, but perhaps there will be a split at some point. But our position is that the U.S. Supreme Court would see this differently in light of those general principles.
At the heart of Bonjean's argument was a clear and straightforward legal point. She pointed out that the statutes of limitations being used in this case had already expired. Let's pause here and make sure we all understand what that means. A statute of limitations sets a deadline. A legal time frame within which charges must be filed or claims must be pursued. Once that deadline passes, the window closes. It cannot simply be reopened at will. The law in its very design recognizes that justice requires boundaries, finality, and the protection of defendants from endless and indefinite exposure to prosecution. Bonjean argued that because these statutes of limitations had already expired, the government could not simply resurrect the charges by pointing to an amendment passed by Congress. Here's where things get complicated, but also where the defense's reasoning shines through with clarity. Congress had indeed amended the statutes of limitations, extending them. But Bonjean's point was crucial: that amendment should not be applied retroactively. The law is not supposed to work backward in ways that harm defendants. This principle is one of the bedrocks of American jurisprudence. If the law changes today, it governs the future and not the past. And when Congress passed its amendment, it used words like shall and will. Words of future implication and not retroactive application. The language Congress chose matters. Legislators do not write in careless phrases. They do not use future-directed words by accident. Bonjean made it clear: the intent was forward-looking. The amendment was meant to apply to future cases, not to revive dead ones. But the judges saw it differently. They insisted that because the amendment was passed before the original limitations had expired, the law was not being applied retroactively. Let's examine that for a moment. On the surface, their reasoning might sound persuasive. If the clock on the old statute had not yet run out when the new law came into effect, then according to them, the case was still alive, and the new timeline could apply. But this interpretation overlooks a fundamental distinction. Retroactivity is not limited to so-called ex post facto effects of new laws. The judges equated retroactivity with ex post facto, as though the two were interchangeable, but they are not. An ex post facto law is one that criminalizes conduct after the fact, punishing someone for something that was not illegal when it was done. That's a clear constitutional violation. But retroactivity is broader. It refers to any law that alters the legal consequences of actions already completed. By extending the statutes of limitations in a way that reached backward, the government effectively changed the legal landscape after the fact. Bonjean highlighted this distinction. She argued that applying the amendment retroactively violated the principle of fairness and contravened the plain language chosen by Congress. Yet the judges ignored this reasoning, choosing instead to conflate retroactivity with ex post facto, and thereby dodging the deeper issue. Let's go back to the wording. When Congress drafted the amendment, they used terms like shall and will. These words in legal drafting carry immense weight. They signify obligation and future application. They are forward-looking. They set a course for what will happen going forward, not for what has already transpired. So when Bonjean pointed to this language, she was not nitpicking over semantics. She was drawing attention to legislative intent. Congress did not say shall have been or will apply to all prior cases. They said shall and will, pointing ahead and not behind. This was not retroactivity. This was not permission to go back in time and breathe life into cases that had already reached their expiration. But despite the strength of this argument, the panel brushed it aside. And as expected, they ruled against R. Kelly anyway. And here is where the sense of malice becomes undeniable. Their dismissal was not just about disagreement. It was about a predetermined outcome. From the very beginning, as Bonjean herself acknowledged, the bias was clear. The judges were not weighing the law with impartial scales. They were not examining the statutes of limitations with open minds. They were defending the government's position, protecting the prosecution's case, and ensuring that R. Kelly would remain ensnared, no matter what the law actually said. This is not a trivial legal debate. It's not an academic exercise about retroactivity and statutes of limitations. It's about fairness, justice, and whether the courts can be trusted to uphold the law as it is written. When statutes of limitations expire, that expiration is final. It is meant to protect defendants from endless indefinite prosecution. To ignore that safeguard is to erode the very protections the legal system is supposed to guarantee. By misapplying the amendment, the judges effectively rewrote history. They allowed the government to do what Congress itself had not explicitly authorized. And they did so at the expense of one man's constitutional rights. Jennifer Bonjean did not enter that courtroom unprepared. She knew the odds. She knew the biases. She knew the panel was already leaning on her client's neck. But she still laid out a clear, rational, and legally sound argument. She exposed the weaknesses in the government's reliance on expired statutes. She drew attention to the prospective language Congress used. She illuminated the difference between retroactivity and ex post facto. And yet the judges dismissed her, dismissed the argument, and dismissed the very principles of fairness that should have guided their decision. The outcome was predetermined. The relief R. Kelly deserved was denied. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.